Ooh boy, Yooka-Replaylee. Really, I've always enjoyed seeing this series bounce about the gaming discussion. It's been a real ride, from its origins as a Banjo-Tooie spiritual successor to its immediate Kickstarter success, from its controversial reception at launch to its impossible 2D platformer follow-up. Through the highs and lows, Yooka-Laylee has been a very fascinating series to study. But even I, someone who's been tracking this series since the beginning, didn't see Yooka-Replaylee coming. The announcement of a heavily revised remake of the 2017 Collectathon platformer caught plenty of us off guard, but lo and behold, Playtonic Games wanted this go-getter duo to get one more shot in the spotlight, this time righting the wrongs of its less than revered original game. Yooka and Laylee may be back, but are they really better than ever? And what does better than ever even really mean here? The song remains the same. Yooka-Laylee was one of the first collectathon throwbacks of the 2010s to really gain public traction. Its Kickstarter campaign was funded incredibly quickly, with an enormous number of people paying it forward to see how these rare alumni could revitalize the subgenre they helped proliferate. They had the pedigree and experience needed to make something on the level of their critically acclaimed past work, which made Yooka-Laylee's middling reception upon its launch all the more damning. It didn't release to fanfare, awkwardly stumbling on stage without a clever opening line to speak. In some circles, this game's disappointing quality was a mark of shame for the studio, as even the very polished 2D follow-up Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair was overlooked or even dismissed by many people. The company swerve away from in-house game development toward publishing other studios' works under the Playtonic Friends label, at least in my eyes, seemed symptomatic of that first game's launch. Despite their best efforts, Playtonic Games' reputation never recovered from Yooka-Laylee. So now, almost a decade later, Playtonic Games are attempting to turn things around for that first game. No spin-offs, just a desire to fix Yooka-Laylee. The 2025 remake of the original project, dubbed Yooka-Replaylee, is the result of that direction. It's not just adding some graphical polish and extra content. This was Playtonic's self-proclaimed, definitive way to experience Yooka and Laylee's first big adventure. Those initial trailers and Playtonic's vigorous marketing of the remake made it clear that there was much more going on under the hood here than expected. And as someone with an extensive history with this franchise, its developers, and the aspirations empowering them, I can't help myself. My personal stakes in this series haven't wavered, and I needed to see if Yooka-Replaylee was the real deal. But in preparation for experiencing Yooka-Replaylee and seeing what it had to offer, I felt like I had to get the big picture fresh in my head. And that means playing the original Yooka-Laylee to full completion again. It was more than 8 years ago when I wrapped up the original Kickstarted Collectathon throwback, so I was curious to know if that game, as flawed as it was, eventually grew on me as the years moved on. I booted up the Steam version of Yooka-Laylee and dove into my first playthrough with the game in nearly a decade. And what was waiting for me was interesting, to say the least. Before getting started here, I do want to praise Playtonic Games for deciding to keep the original Yooka-Laylee listed on digital storefronts. There's been a disturbing trend in the games industry as of late to erase, or at least demean, the older versions of games that are getting remade, saying that they should be replaced by superior modern versions. And even with Yooka-Replaylee making a pretty blatant effort to say how much better it is than the original 2017 game, the fact that Yooka-Laylee is still available for purchase does make this vibe a bit less egregious. The wrinkles of the past shouldn't be ironed out to the point of vanishing, and we should be able to experience less than optimal versions of games that have released over the years. I very much expected Playtonic to delist Yooka-Laylee in some way after Replaylee launched, but to my surprise, the original, albeit significantly patched form, is still available for gamers to experience. Warts and all, Yooka-Laylee 2017 still exists, and that's absolutely a good thing. But keep that all in the backs of your minds for now. Right after landing in the first level, Tribal Stack Tropics, it all came back to me. For a game with such a heavy emphasis on exploration, Yooka-Laylee has a hard time with its world sizes. You can unlock the 5 main worlds on their own using pages you collect, then you can expand them into larger forms with another toll of pages. When examining the worlds in their base and expanded sizes, the size difference is enormous, and having that frame of reference shows that neither size really hits the bullseye. The base worlds are too simplistic and confined to stay interesting, while the expanded worlds are too spacious and lack density and objectives. The sweet spot would likely be somewhere in the middle, though that still results in a large amount of open space in the worlds. Perhaps this is to compensate for the easily abused flight ability, but aside from levels like Capital Casino, verticality feels like an afterthought. Sure, you can fly up super high, but there aren't that many items or objectives to complete when in the air. If anything, the flight just makes getting from the ground floor to the top faster, while also effectively breaking any difficulty from the native on-foot platforming challenges. The collectibles are still Yooka-Laylee's biggest stumble though, where important items that should be easy to find are tucked away in some bafflingly concealed spots, neither encouraging thoughtful discovery nor providing paths for the player to coherently navigate. I'll always come back to how some quills, which are essential to earning new moves from Trouser the Snake, are placed in out-of-the-way locations, a total contrast to how key collectibles were placed in games like Banjo-Kazooie. It almost requires a hunter tonic to find these items in a practical way, and that's no direction for a collectathon to go, especially when older games already nailed down the best method. Because of their low quantity and spacious placement, the collectibles contribute to the worlds feeling so large and empty, which is a real shame. There are plenty more issues with Yooka-Laylee. The awkward, unpolished level geometry makes it tough to know where you can or can't go. Rextro's arcade minigames are repetitive and uninteresting. The transformations don't take advantage of their unique designs in creative ways. Kartos' minecart tracks are janky and hard to control. The trivia quizzes from Dr. Quack are literally too narrow in scope. The list goes on. But here's the thing. Yooka-Laylee is not as bad as I remember it to be. I know, I was shocked too. My time playing through this game was still rough. This is still a game with a lot of problems, but I was pretty damn surprised at how straightforward my playthrough felt. Over my hours of playtime, I learned to navigate those giant levels more easily and identify key landmarks so I wouldn't get lost. I kept a sharper eye out for collectibles of all types, carefully searching those little nooks and crannies scattered throughout the stages. I started chuckling at the characters' goofy puns and weird banter. Call it Stockholm Syndrome, but all of the frustration that this game had accumulated over the years, it started to just melt away. Dare I say it? I was having a pretty good time playing Yooka-Laylee. When channeled through that lens, I saw the potential for the game as a spiritual successor to collectathons of the past because the breadth of discovery and curiosity had always been there, beating in the game's heart. Beyond the lack of polish and bloated ambitions was a game that wanted you to dig deep into its levels, learning the proper paths and finding the buried treasure that was carefully placed in each world. Did it always hit the bullseye? Of course not. The issues I've listed are not worth overlooking. But it's a compelling collectathon, enough of one that I'm still trying to figure out what exactly I and many others were smoking all those years ago. Maybe the expectations were too high. Maybe large gaming Kickstarter campaigns hadn't earned enough reputability yet. Maybe game criticism on YouTube was just in a really sour mood during that time. Because Yooka-Laylee is not a lost cause, far from it. And I think that wave of forgiveness is well overdue. A bad game is not bad forever, but a misunderstood game is good eventually. I think I remember hearing someone famous say that before. Anyway, regardless of what occurred in the past, my time with Yooka-Laylee in the 2020s wasn't some miserable trudge through hell. There was clearly fun to be had here, and that new playthrough made my curiosity toward Yooka-Replaylee all the stronger. It seemed like a real second chance for this game to get where the devs wanted it to be. If the original game grew on me over time, then it could only go up from here. Because on paper, Yooka-Laylee should be the perfect specimen of a game that actually deserves a remake. There's been this lingering sentiment online where games are given remakes when the original experience is of already high quality. These are games that have already nailed it in their respective genres, so remaking them seems awfully redundant. In more extreme and cynical cases, these remakes distort or misinterpret the appeal of these already pitch-perfect originals, resulting in inferior ways to experience them. Remaking a game is giving it another chance, so it's far more admirable to look at a less than perfect example and give it an opportunity to reach its full potential. Those who've already succeeded aren't the ones that need another chance. That's what's been said anyway. So Yooka-Laylee, an imperfect game that clearly had plenty of ideas worth refining, should result in a perfect remake, the ideal example of the very concept. It's golden, it's exactly what we want to see. But it's not a perfect remake. In fact, Yooka-Replaylee makes a number of strange design decisions that can feel like pointless inclusions at best, and at worst, can trample on parts of the original game's appeal. Yooka-Replaylee begins very differently from its original. Instead of picking up right at Shipwreck Creek, Yooka and Laylee's journey starts on their aptly named vessel, the Batship Crazy, which hits a storm while on the seas. After reaching landfall, the duo explores a nearby cave and encounters the One Book, the sacred reality-shaping tome holding the magical pages. The book uses its powers to give Yooka and Laylee all of their moves from the original game right off the bat, in addition to a few extras. But it's not long after that when Capital B, the big shot leader of Ivory Towers, tries to steal the book for his own nefarious purposes. To keep its power out of Capital B's hands, the One Book releases the pages, letting them loose as collectibles in the worlds Yooka and Laylee explore. While the tutorial caves aren't that mechanically helpful or aesthetically pleasing, I do appreciate the vibe of this new story intro. The storybook tale of Yooka and Laylee's ship is very cute, while still giving the duo their iconic personality quirks. Yooka is the kind and polite one, with Laylee being his brash and outspoken partner, and that dynamic remains entertaining, presented with clever banter that even outclasses Banjo and Kazooie's in some cases. Even without presenting any enormous changes to the pacing, it's a fine, endearing intro that's well worth experiencing. I also want to praise the game's updated art direction. The more detailed and cartoony models, along with their expressive celebratory animations, are easy to appreciate. The style is so much more polished, though I will say that it makes the overall aesthetic feel less Banjo-esque. Even the main menu is a stark difference from the original game, where in Yooka-Laylee you could absolutely see the devs trying to replicate their work seen in Banjo-Kazooie, from the text to the HUD. Yooka-Replaylee goes a different path, one that feels distinct in the face of those N64 influences. You still get plenty of funny, endearing dialogue and upbeat musical scores, so it's not a total overhaul in the presentation department. What was changed makes sense to change, while still holding that goofy spirit tightly. You can use Shipwreck Creek and Capital B's Ivory Towers hub world to experiment with the moveset, though this does present a pretty serious issue when it comes to gameplay progression. Aside from a few sparse inconsequential additions, like the underwater attack, Yooka-Replaylee doesn't provide any new abilities for the duo throughout its campaign. The sonar shot, the buddy slam, the reptile roll, you get them all at the very beginning of the game, even before the first world is open. While this definitely gives the player a lot of immediate traversal options, it erases the fulfilling feeling of steadily growing stronger and better equipped for the challenges ahead. Sure, you have the fluidity of a packed moveset from the get-go, but one big point of appeal for classic collectathons was earning new techniques that opened up new areas, or let you solve more complex puzzles, or even help you complete steeper tasks in older stages. I know that people don't like backtracking in their collectathons, and no Banjo-Tooie apologist like myself is going to change their minds. But even the mostly level-by-level Banjo-Kazooie gave you new moves to tinker with throughout its campaign, gradually building out your toolbox for exploring and solving puzzles. Yooka-Replaylee, almost as some kind of apology for making you put up with the original game's roadblocks and backtracking, gives you everything you need from the beginning, and that makes its campaign so much less interesting. I've already gone over why the collectibles in Yooka-Laylee miss their mark, but Yooka-Replaylee does try to resolve that issue. That being said, there is such a thing as overcorrecting, and the coin collectibles are where that occurs. They pop up in various places, sometimes acting as paths to destinations, sometimes just appearing after messing around with objects in the environment. But their use is incredibly extraneous, mostly being used as currency for tonics or other cosmetics. I imagine they were put in to remedy the lack of collectible path-making from the original, as they do pop up to map out platforming trails in each world, but it's really hard to care about the coins when their value is so limited. They appear and disappear everywhere, so eventually you just become numb to their jingle and stop caring about them entirely. But even then, the collectible placement problem still isn't really solved. For example, despite there being 150 quills per world, they can still appear tucked away in weird spots, though they now glow with some brighter, more noticeable colors. The quills still all need to be collected for a pagey, but since you have all of the moves from the start, you don't give quills to Trouser the Snake for adding techniques to your repertoire anymore. Now the quills can increase health, stamina, or offer some extra bonuses, though with their purpose diminished so harshly, it makes finding them feel so much less compelling. They're still oddly tough to find, and though they aren't nearly as well hidden as in Yooka-Laylee 2017, the quills mean even less now than they did in that game. The pages, on the other hand, are everywhere, with a grand total of 50 in each of Yooka-Replaylee's worlds, twice as many as in Yooka-Laylee's. They're distributed so much more often than before. Many challenges that had multiple steps like collecting the 5 Ghost Riders now give you a pagey per step, even giving you 3 more when all of the ghosts are collected. So you'll be swimming in pages barely halfway through the campaign, especially if you're a diligent collector. This revision, while definitely giving off an indulgent Super Mario Odyssey vibe, isn't inherently bad, at least not on its own. In some circumstances, this can make reaching pagey toll significantly easier, which is true, but you're still doing many of the same tasks as you did in the first game. You're just now getting rewarded more frequently. That being said, this isn't limited to the pages. Yooka-Replaylee just feels like an easier game. Any player who's mildly familiar with the genre won't have to do much to reach the final boss in no time flat. The plentiful distribution of pages, the far from demanding pagey door requirements, along with removing a lot of the importance of the quills, accelerates world-to-world progression to an uncomfortably breezy level. Without that friction, that sense that something is actively trying to keep you from reaching your goal, Yooka-Replaylee winds down with a real whimper. If you're up for fully completing the game, you'll certainly get a lot out of each level, though if you're mad dashing it to the final boss, which is a heavy downgrade from the first games, there's very little incentive to engage with the stages. The game doesn't need you to do that. That's a noticeable issue because without opportunities or incentives to learn about a level's layout, all that traversal becomes a slog. The Mark character is absolutely evident of this. After you locate one of his bookmarked map locations, he can be used as a warp point at any time in the level. Some larger levels like Galleon Galaxy benefit from having immediate transportation, alleviating their massive sizes and disjointed structures. But this doesn't give you a chance to really explore a level and learn about its layout. It's not like in Banjo-Tooie or Donkey Kong 64, where warp pads were spread out across different regions, sections, and chambers. Mark's locations are often in the large open space of the level, making their main purpose just to get from one side of the map to the other. They appear as a concession for the removal of the ability to fly anytime, but even that move, despite needing a real nerf, had utility in the large levels because you could still travel and get your bearings. Warp pads don't fulfill that same purpose. Instead of flying around a stage to get a keen bird's eye view of where to go next, you can just warp right there. It's not the same at all. The less significant changes from Yooka-Laylee still manage to ripple outward into the game's design. Some interior sections have been replaced with these awkward caves, which don't provide nearly as much nuance or creativity as before. Rextro's minigames are heavily altered to a single gameplay style, which, while functional and cute, don't provide an enormous challenge. Kartos' minecart physics are polished and simplified, but the stages are still frustrating to control. Dr. Quack's Quackfire quizzes are outright removed, which really stings because I always did like in-game trivia that rewards you for paying attention to the world you explore and the characters you encounter. And as mentioned, the last boss, Capital B, is so much less interesting than in his original 2017 battle, keeping you grounded while avoiding some repetitive AoE attacks, nowhere near as multi-dimensional as Yooka-Laylee's. After playing both versions of the game in sequence, I can say with certainty that there's a theme persisting around Yooka-Replaylee's overall design. From the frequency of pagey collection to giving the player all of the moves from the beginning, to even the easier difficulty as a whole, this is a game that wants to streamline everything. It wants to remove whatever small bits of inconvenience that may have damaged the original's design, replacing them with something smoother, cleaner, and better, I guess. This all occurs with the base world structure mostly unchanged from Yooka-Laylee, so what you're left with is the same game, but with all of the moves and items handed to you on a silver platter, no questions asked. I've heard some folks say that Yooka-Replaylee is the true Yooka-Laylee, the ideal form that the developers wanted to make but didn't have the time or resources to do so, but I have trouble believing that. It's because so many of its revisions are so clearly tied to the complaints toward the original. They feel like responses. The stamina bar, the overuse of flight, the collectibles, the lack of path making. I vividly remember these being vocally expressed by the community. Hell, I complained about a lot of this myself. And sure, listening to feedback and criticism should be praised, but like I said before, there is such a thing as overcorrecting, and Yooka-Replaylee skirts that line far more closely than I would have liked. And I really hate saying all this because Yooka-Replaylee is a good game. Damn good. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have a fun time with it, but that might be because it's a new version of Yooka-Laylee, a game that I already admitted that I had a good time playing. That's really what's keeping this game afloat for me, but even with that in mind, Yooka-Replaylee doesn't make enough changes to really feel like a new adventure, or even a remake to an existing one. It feels like a mod, a new game plus where you have all of the tools you need from square one. Tools that quote-unquote fix the game, but with all of the wrinkles smoothed out to the point where everything feels sterile and frictionless. There's no challenge left, there's no reason to think differently. You're playing Yooka-Laylee again, just with a bunch of quality of life changes in place. Changes that may or may not alter the very dynamic of its design. In some perspectives, this breezy, frictionless experience might seem like an overdue victory lap for enduring the long saga of the Yooka-Laylee name. But I don't see these changes as overt rewards. This whole Yooka-Replaylee deal really got me thinking of what an ideal remake should actually look like. Should it stay firmly true to the original design in every way, never taking creative liberties? Should it make drastic changes to appear as a fully unique experience from that original? What Yooka-Replaylee showed me is that both of these directions can coexist, but not necessarily for the better. Because Yooka-Replaylee occupies this space between, where it simultaneously does too much and doesn't do enough to really justify its existence as a remake. If this is a design blueprint for a brand new, totally original 3D platformer project from Playtonic, then maybe I can see its value in a different light. But I don't respect Yooka-Replaylee in the same way as I do the original. For all its jankiness and lack of polish, Yooka-Laylee 2017 had an imaginative spirit, catapulted by its developers' desire to revitalize one of the most precious subgenres of its era. It was an answer to a challenge, and that's something that I wholeheartedly admire. Yooka-Replaylee, on the other hand, lacks that daring attitude, perfectly content with smoothing out those rough, abrasive edges down to inoffensive nubs, drained of challenge and rich with indulgent but unfulfilling design. Now, despite what this video might imply, I'm not anti-remake. While I would say there are far too many of them around nowadays, I don't think remaking a game is some sacrilegious defilement of these precious classics that have vitalized the medium. Regardless of what that streamer or YouTuber tells you, our childhoods will remain unchanged if Silent Hill 2, Resident Evil 4, or Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater get remakes. Those original games are still here. You can find them, and you can play them. So maybe that's the message I really want to share here. I grew to appreciate Yooka-Laylee 2017 so much more by replaying it nearly a decade after it first launched. Games of the past still have the potential to make a splash with you long after their heyday, and maybe they can become even more relevant now than they did back then. Regardless of my mixed thoughts toward Yooka-Laylee, the game's flaws shouldn't deter you from experiencing it. It may sound needlessly romantic, but wrinkles are symptoms of personality, of emotion. They pulse through the game's code like blood, reminding you that art doesn't come from a perfect ideal specimen, but through ambitious, flawed human beings. Yooka-Laylee 2017 should be played, and I encourage you to do so. And if you end up not liking it, well, the remake's there too, proudly standing with its own flaws on display. It's a fun, breezy, ultimately harmless game, but one whose chase to outdo its original ends up being its greatest misstep, a cold, calculated desire to clean itself up to the point of sanitization. And maybe that's its own true wrinkle. Thank you for watching.